Hey everyone! I want to take you along with me today as I'm making a full meal plus dessert entirely from scratch. Now, this is not going to be an example of a quick and easy weeknight meal, but more of a special meal, maybe for a weekend, a celebration, or maybe a holiday. This is going to be one of those meals where maybe you want to spend a little more time, maybe for company or something like that. But even with that in mind, I'm hoping today to show you that cooking from scratch doesn't have to be super daunting or even extremely time consuming. Hopefully I'll give you a little inspiration for cooking in your own kitchen as well. So with that said, let's get started. On the menu today is chicken Alfredo lasagna with homemade sourdough pasta, a side salad and sourdough focaccia bread, and apple pie for dessert. Alright, so full disclosure, there were a couple components of this meal that I did prepare ahead of time, and one of those was going ahead and mixing up the sourdough pasta. This is a long fermented recipe and I wanted it to be ready to go by the next day, so I did mix this up the night before. I combined 3 eggs, 1/2 cup of starter, 1 teaspoon of salt, and 2 tablespoons of olive oil in the bowl of my KitchenAid stand mixer and gave that a good whisk. After that, I added in 2 cups of all-purpose flour and I set that to low to medium speed and just let that knead until it formed a dough. You may need a little bit more flour depending on the hydration of your starter, but 2 cups is definitely a good starting point. Just add a tablespoon or 2 at a time additionally if you feel like you need a little bit more. So just add that to the bowl of your stand mixer, add the dough hook, and just let that knead for about 5 minutes, and then just wrap the dough tightly in some plastic wrap and just let that set at room temperature. Kind of like in my last video on the sourdough lemon cake, go ahead and check out the blog post for the sourdough pasta recipe if you are uncomfortable in any way with long fermenting recipes at room temperature that have eggs. You could do this in the fridge. You would just have to leave it for about 24 hours instead of 6. Okay, moving on to a pie crust. This is the next day. We're gonna go ahead and just get started with the sourdough pie crust for the apple pie. I wanna start with the things that are sourdough so that they have plenty of time to ferment before I finish them this evening. So I'm adding 1 cup of flour, 1/2 tablespoon of cornstarch, 1/2 teaspoon of salt, and 1 stick of cold butter to a bowl, and we're just going to cut that all in together with a fork until it's a nice crumbly texture. And then we'll add in about 1/2 cup of sourdough starter discard and stir that all together with our fork until it is well combined in a solid dough. Then we'll just let it set in the bowl for about 6 hours to reap the benefits of those long fermented grains. Alright, now I'm going to be moving on to the next sourdough item that I'm going to be making today, and that is a sourdough focaccia bread. Now, I am actually combining a little bit of yeast with the sourdough in this recipe. I don't know about the rest of you, but sometimes I find it a little difficult to get a really fluffy dough with just straight sourdough. So I did decide to jumpstart this with just a little bit of yeast, but I'm still getting the benefits of those fermented grains because of the sourdough starter added in there. So I'm combining 1 cup of warm water, 1 teaspoon of yeast, 1 teaspoon of honey, and 1/2 cup of sourdough starter, and I'm going to whisk that all together and let it set for about 5 minutes. After those 5 minutes, I'm going to come back in and stir in 3 cups of flour, 1.5 teaspoons of sea salt, and I'm just going to gently mix that. I'm not going to knead this in a stand mixer or anything. I'm just going to gently mix it, and that's going to be good for this. Then in another bowl, I am going to generously pour in some olive oil, about 2 to 3 tablespoons, and I'm just going to set that dough down into that bowl of olive oil and let it rise and ferment, and then we'll come back to that in a little bit. Now I'm going to be moving on and starting one of the things that I need to get done in order to assemble the chicken Alfredo lasagna a little later. This is the other task that I completed earlier to be able to make this meal today, and that was getting a whole chicken roasted. We just had that for dinner a different day, and so now I'm just picking off some of that leftover chicken from that whole rotisserie chicken to use in this chicken Alfredo lasagna. Just a little side note here. If you are kind of new to from scratch cooking, or if assembling a whole meal sounds a little daunting to you, really take time to write out all of the tasks that need to be done to prepare the meal and prioritize them. See what needs to be done first and be sure to tackle those first. And then move on, write out the little tasks that need to be done and just take it one task at a time and your meal will come together. I promise, even if it sounds a little daunting. Here I'm just quartering, peeling, and very thinly slicing 6 apples for the apple pie. And then I'm gonna go ahead and add in 1/4 cup of maple sugar, 1/4 cup of cane sugar, 1/2 teaspoon of cinnamon, and a pinch of nutmeg, and 1/4 cup of flour, and stir all of that together to complete the apple pie filling. We're just about ready to start baking some of these items that we've been preparing today, but before we do that, we definitely need to get this sourdough pasta from the day before rolled out. Now, I highly recommend that you have the pasta roller attachment for your KitchenAid if you plan on trying this recipe. I'm not saying that it would be impossible to just do this with a rolling pin, but it would definitely take some more time. If you have that kind of time, go for it. There's nothing wrong with that, but the pasta roller is very much the way that I prefer to do this. So I'm going to divide my pasta dough into 4 equal sections, and I'm just going to flatten out one section at a time and start feeding it through my pasta roller. I like to keep the KitchenAid on the lowest speed and keep the pasta roller attachment on the widest setting, and then just keep setting the pasta roller thinner and thinner until I get the noodles to the thickness that I would like for them to be. If you take anything away from this section of the video, please take this. It is so important to keep the surface of the pasta dough very well floured as you are feeding it through the pasta roller. I learned this the hard way and ended up with my pasta just a giant mess because it was not well floured and it stuck to everything. So flour the surface on the bottom and the top well before you feed it through every time so that it does not stick. Once you have your pasta rolled out, you can go ahead and just cut it into strips about 12 inches long and 3 inches wide. I find that it's really easy to do this with a pizza cutter. Just cut those strips with that pizza cutter and then place them on a floured surface until you are ready to boil them. This pasta recipe did make a few more noodles than what I could have used in the chicken Alfredo lasagna recipe. I think I used about 16 of the noodles that I cut. Whatever you don't use, you can actually just put in the freezer before you even boil them, and they will keep just fine that way. Also, just a side note here, you do not have to make homemade noodles for your chicken Alfredo lasagna that we're going to be making soon to still be delicious. I love making my own pasta. It's kind of a little bit of a hobby whenever I have the time to do it. I of course still buy some store-bought pasta from time to time, but once again, that is not necessary. You can certainly use store-bought lasagna noodles if that is what you prefer. Getting a really big stock pot of water going to boil the lasagna noodles, and while that's boiling, since I have a floured counter already, instead of cleaning up twice, I'm going to go ahead and roll out my pie crust. I started actually by dividing my pie crust into 2 equal sections, and then I realized my recipe always makes too much crust, so I actually ended up and used 1/3 of the pie crust for the bottom and 1/3 for the top, and I just threw the other 1/3 in the fridge, and I'll just use that up for a quiche at some other time. So I rolled that out nice and thin and lined my pie plate with it, and then I'm going to go ahead and put my apple pie filling in there and top it off with the other piece of pie crust, do a nice little edging, and that will be ready to bake. I did forget to mention, before you add the top piece of pie crust to your pie, you'll want to cut about 2 tablespoons of butter into little cubes and place that all over the apple pie filling before you put that piece of crust over top. So the water for the pasta is now boiling. I added in a couple tablespoons of olive oil just so the noodles don't stick together. I'm going to add those right in there to the boiling water and let those boil for about 5 minutes, and then we're going to strain them and move on from there. I did spray my noodles with some cold water to help them keep from sticking together, but just to make sure that they don't, because that's another lesson that I've learned the hard way, I'm going to drape these noodles over the sides of the colanders just so they are not sticking together and making a big clump. Now we're going to get the rest of the layers ready to assemble the lasagna. For starters, we're going to get the spinach ready. I'm just going to do a couple big handfuls of frozen spinach and just let that start thawing on a plate. And then we're going to move on to the Alfredo sauce. We're going to start by melting 4 tablespoons of butter in a small saucepan over low to medium heat. And once that's melted, we'll go ahead and pour in 1 cup of heavy whipping cream. We'll stir that really well to get it all combined. And then we'll go ahead and drop in 2 ounces of cream cheese and let that start to melt and get all creamy before we add in the rest of the ingredients. Then we'll add in 3/4 cup of grated Parmesan cheese, 2 pinches of salt, and 1/2 tablespoon of parsley, and stir that really well until it's all nice and creamy and well combined. it's finally time to start layering the lasagna. I'm going to spread a little bit of that Alfredo sauce on the bottom so that my noodles don't stick, and then after that the first layer is of course going to be our noodles. I found that I was using about 3 or 4 strips along the bottom to get a nice solid layer. Our next layer after that is going to be mozzarella cheese, shredded mozzarella cheese, ricotta cheese, and spinach. I found that for this entire lasagna I used about 2 cups of frozen spinach, 1 6-ounce bag of mozzarella, 8 ounces of ricotta cheese, and 3 cups of shredded rotisserie chicken. Once we have that layer of mozzarella and ricotta cheese down, we will go ahead and add another layer of lasagna noodles and then go for our shredded chicken and more of our Alfredo sauce. And then we're just going to repeat that layering process of adding more noodles, another layer of mozzarella, ricotta, and spinach, more noodles after that, and another layer of chicken and Alfredo sauce until you have used up all of your ingredients. Be sure to save enough mozzarella cheese at the end so that you have one final layer of lasagna noodles and mozzarella cheese at the top. Once the lasagna is all layered, I'll just be baking it in the oven at 350 degrees for about 20 to 30 minutes until that cheese looks nice and golden on the top. Getting down to one of the final steps of making this meal come together, and that is to bake the focaccia bread. I'm going to generously coat a cast iron skillet in olive oil, probably another couple tablespoons down in that skillet, and then I'm going to place the dough right into that skillet and dimple it with my fingers, drizzle it with even more olive oil, and I decided to top it with some fresh rosemary and chives from the garden. And then I'm going to bake this in a 425 degree oven for about 20 minutes until it's getting a little bit golden on the top. So my chicken Alfredo lasagna is done, so I'm going to pull that out of the oven and replace it with the focaccia bread and the apple pie, and I'm going to go ahead and get that baked, and then I'm going to start on getting this all plated with a little side salad and ready to go for this yummy, yummy dinner. Thank you all so much for stopping by our homestead yet another week. I hope you enjoyed this video, just coming along with me as I was cooking this dinner for my family. Let me know if you have tried any of these things before, or if maybe you plan on trying them for the first time after watching this video. And until next week, I hope you all have a lovely weekend and lovely week, and I will see you all then. Bye!